Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you so much for the day and just to be alive in this time. And we thank you for this high calling, Lord, and each one of us are here to answer this call. We pray for a deeper understanding, Lord, of things presented to us through your servants. And with the study tonight, Lord, I pray that we will walk away with a better understanding of hello. Let's start. Can you hear me? Already cut it off here. So.
Yes, we can. I think you cut it a little bit.
Yeah, it disconnected there for a second. Okay, let's try it again. I'll start the prayer over again. So, dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you so much for bringing us all here today and just for the opportunity to be alive in this time. And Lord, we just want to thank you for all these things that you've been teaching us, Lord. We just pray for wisdom and understanding in all of these topics, Lord. And we thank you for the increase of knowledge as it's been opening up to us. And we also pray for each other, Lord, as each one of us are experiencing our own difficulties in our lives. And we just want to strive to give all to you, and not only for ourselves, but for the salvation of other people, Lord, and for the harvest that you prepared for us. We pray that your Spirit will be with us here now, Lord, and to fill us and to make each of us more like you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay. Here's my notes. All right. All right, so Reconsidering Islam. So if you were to ask somebody in this movement what they thought about the civil rights movement back in the 1950s when it was going on, what do you think that the reaction would be from people within this movement? And the civil rights had to do with more to do with race than anything. Does anyone have an opinion of how we might have reacted in during that movement?
I don't get the question.
You don't get the question? Is that
you're saying, like, if the civil rights movement defending race happened, how would we if we lived back then, how would we react?
Just a general answer, like how do you think that people with the mindset that we have had in this movement, is this something that we would have been opposed to, do you think, in that time?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, that's what I think also. So we'd like to think that all things being equal, that if we were back in the 1950s, we'd be standing right there with our brothers and sisters who are fighting for equality, and that we'd see the issues pretty clearly, and that we'd have no trouble today looking back into the 1950s and seeing what those issues were, and seeing right from wrong in regards to what was going on in that movement. But if you come forward 10 years into the 1960s, and then you have the beginning of basically the feminist movement or the feminist waves, what is our perception of the movement, of those movements today? Like, do we look on the feminist movement of the 1960s the same way that we look on the civil rights movement of the 1950s? And when you think about this, again, we'd like to think that we'd tend to, we'd like to think that we would be on the right side of things, but we tend to struggle when we come forward just one decade into a completely different type of movement. And we don't look at these things with the same eyes, these two topics the same way. So, I mean, would we have called ourselves feminists back then, whether we were a male or a female? I mean, even if we say it today, there seems to be a little bit of discomfort with the thought. And so I guess the question is, why is that? You know, what difference does 10 years make? And basically what it has to do with the trouble that we have getting rid of our Protestant mindset, which is deeply ingrained within us on certain issues and maybe not so much on others. So we're going to look at have a quick review of the Apis Bull study before we get into this. Okay, so if we go back to the 70-year captivity of Babylon right here, and the Jews were in captivity to literal Babylon from 608 BC to 538 BC. And before that, God's people worshipped literal idols. So over here, they worshipped literal idols before they went into captivity, namely the Apis Bull, among others, but that was kind of their primary. And that 70-year captivity where they were put into the hands of the Babylonians for a period of time, they were completely immersed in idolatry. And it cured them it cured them of their physical idolatry, so that when they came out the other end, they came out in 3 decrees over here. And by the time you get to the 3rd decree in 457 BC, what did that allow them to do? Well, the 1st and 2nd decree were instructions for them to go back and rebuild the temple. It says it was 46 years in John chapter 2. And when they rebuild the temple, there were no more idols in 457 BC, or there were no idols in 457 BC. And they were then by Babylon, they were then allowed some of their own autonomy. They were able to make their own laws, and they were able to have some of their own government. However, they were still under the control. They were no longer under control of Babylon, but they're under control of the Medes and the Persians. So but they were allowed some autonomy in this time. And they came out with no idols on the other end. So now they have no literal idols, but we understand that it was only the form that they got rid of, and they didn't get rid of the spirit of their idolatry. And this is the premise of the Apis Bull study, the difference between the form and the spirit. The idols that they had prior to the captivity represented a male patriarchal warrior god. And when they came out of captivity, they still had the same idea about God in their mind. They may not have fashioned him after a bull, but he was still what that bull had represented. Okay. So now on this slide, we come down to another period in history in the 1260 years. And now they're in captivity to spiritual Babylon from 538 to 1798. And what was it that God's people had wrong prior to this captivity? Well, they began to worship on Sunday, and this began on March 3rd, 321 AD. That was Constantine's Sunday law. For 1260 years, God's people were immersed in the wine of Babylon. And when they came out of the other end, they were prepared to get rid of their Babylonian idol. And they were in captivity to spiritual Babylon, or the mother, which we'll refer to as this time period. And when they come out, there's again 46 years to build the temple from 1798 to 1844. And then when we come down to our line, our time, and we realize that the Church of God went into a Laodicean condition, really back here somewhere. But we're marking the time for 126 years that runs from 1863 to 1989. And this again was spiritual Babylon, but this time it was the daughters. And that's the period that we're in right now. And So they go into captivity in 1863 up until 1989 when God is going to bring them out and begin the process of reforming his people. So that's the beginning of the process. And they would have to be fully immersed in between 1863 and 1989, so that by 1989 they'll have to get rid of something. And that something is, it's a mindset, and whatever mindset it is that they hold on to prior to the captivity is what they'll go into captivity to, and that is obviously what they have to come out of or be reformed from by the end of that. And by 2014, the church is organized and reformed. So as we've studied many things and discovered that we needed to come out of the same thing that, all Adventists have to come out of, the same things that we inherited from spiritual Babylon, or also known as the apostate Protestant churches, they would fall under the headings of nationalism, sexism, homophobia, and conspiracy theories. So this is the mindset that we needed to come out of, that we were immersed in for 126 years. And so some of the examples of the conspiracy theories that that we're looking at when we some of the things that we realized we had to come out of, but also some things that are common conspiracies or ideas that are a part of that mindset that comes from spiritual Babylon. And so some of them are anti-globalism, which is just a wrong understanding of the United Nations, anti-vaccines, which we're seeing an awful lot of these days, anti-feminism, which has been, it seems like the more that feminism grows or progresses, the more you hear advocates who are against it, and they're equally as aggressive. Another one is the idea of a Judeo-Christian West that must have a Christian morality in government. So this is something that we've seen, we've learned a lot from in the Episcopal studies and the studies going over the notes of Jared Goldstein, and seeing these periods of church-state relationships that we have in the West, and this idea that the West is the United States must have a Christian morality in their government. Another thing that we probably are pretty familiar with is capitalism versus socialism. And this is something that comes up in each of these three, what do you call it? The periods of, I don't know what you call, like the three waves of apostate Protestantism, as they almost like they have their own reform lines, or lines where they begin and end. And so there's obviously a lot more that we can go over, more conspiracies that we could talk about. But when we look back at the lines, we see that the problem with literal idols is a problem with understanding law, namely the first and the second commandments. And so the law has to be understood at a spiritual level when rebuilding the spiritual temple. And they managed to get rid of the form of their idolatry, but they didn't get rid of the spirit of their idolatry, and therefore they couldn't keep the law in its spirit. So when we come down to the second line, Sunday has to do away. Sunday has to be the thing that they do away with, and it has to do with the fourth commandment. And when we come down to the third line, and that's our history, we have a list of conspiracy theories, and it can be said that they all have to do with breaking one law. And if you broke all of these problems down into one law, which one would it be? Well, in one sense, you could say that it has to do with all of the last six, right? About loving your neighbor and how we relate to other people. But we can look into the alpha of our history and how that led up to the Civil War in the 1860s and the attitude of the Protestants to slavery. But there's one commandment in particular that you could group all of these problems into, and it's the ninth commandment. And that commandment says that thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. So who is your neighbor? Well, your neighbor just means another person, basically. And the law states that you cannot bear false witness against another person. So that means that we're not only commanded to not bear false witness, but we're also expected to give a true witness of other people. And we should have an understanding of the world around us and the people who are around us, that we, so that we do not bear false witness against them. And this is what has been going on in reference to this particular topic with Islam. Is, I'm embarrassed to say that I was the same way. And we say a lot of things out of complete ignorance, and we know nothing about these people or their origin. And the sad part about that is, as Seventh-day Adventists, we're a church that has experienced that in our foundation, that we were ostracized for being different. And most people who criticize the church, they really have no idea about our history, and they really don't understand it. So we've done the same thing to other people that we had done to us, and really we should have known better. And so in each of the conspiracies that were listed above, whether we're against science or whether we're against the government, or seems even today like whether you're against the doctors or against Bill Gates, we bear false witness against people through conspiracy theories. And we cannot afford to bring this false witness, bear false witness against these people. I mean, we were so protective of the Sabbath. We know that we cannot afford to not keep the Sabbath. Well, this is just another one of those commandments, and we have to be as diligent about how we keep all of them, the same way that we focus on keeping the Sabbath, and the same way that we are loyal to the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is no longer the test for us. I mean, it doesn't seem to be much of a problem for us to keep the Sabbath, but some of the other commandments we really stumble on. And so in the 1800s, we bore false witness against our fellow man, and in reference to in the United States, against the black men and women who were enslaved, and with the idea that they were inferior to other people. And this was literally the belief that they had in that time. And so this is a commandment that needs to be understood as we pass through our time period. We need to better understand the ninth commandment. And we have to accurately represent the people who are around us. And we, whether it's unintentional or intentional, it's breaking God's law to misrepresent the people who are around us. So this is why we're taking an opportunity to look at Islam and Muslims and the history surrounding Muslims, and primarily Muhammad. And so we understand that Islam is a subject of Bible prophecy, and there's a lot of Islamophobia at the end of the world. So we need to have, a correct understanding of Muslims and Islam, so that we don't bear false witness against them, as we probably, most of us probably have in the past. And just as a side note, that this study is not intended to do away with our prophetic understanding of Islam and Bible prophecy, whether we're talking about the three woes or the trumpets or 9/11. It's not about doing away with any of that. All this study is intended to do is to open up our eyes to the neighbors who are around us, so that we can have a right understanding of them, and so that we can represent them correctly. And when we are in ignorance of people, again, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, it breeds fear. And fear is what Donald Trump had worked on during his presidency. He breeds fear in people, in his followers, against minorities, against other religions, and against people of different color or different nations. And the idea is to keep people in ignorance, and therefore keep them in fear. And in order to come out of ignorance, you need to have knowledge, and even more so, as we're learning now, wisdom. And you need to go back with kind of a peripheral vision and have a look at the whole situation and understand things in their historical context. The same way that we would want people to view not only the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but this movement. We would want people to have a right understanding of us before they pass any sort of judgment on us. And so Ignorance leads to fear, and fear leads to having a wrong attitude towards things like globalism, feminism, vaccines, you name it. And so it's the Protestant world that creates a lot of this fear, and it begins all the way back in the time period of 1798 onward. It's their worldview that dehumanizes people. And so part of the purpose of these studies is to stop the dehumanizing of any group of people, in particular in this study with Muslims. And the purpose is to challenge Islamophobia. And as we see, Parminder has been bringing out the topic on gender identity, and sexual preference, and LGBT. And this is the same thing. It's about gaining an understanding and no longer passing judgment based off ignorance and conspiracy. So on September 29th, there was a presidential debate that was between Trump and Biden. And for those that have seen it, we all know that it'll go down into history for a lot of reasons. It was actually kind of difficult to watch. And one of the things that the commentators took note of was that was not so much about the things that were spoken of, but about the things that weren't spoken of. So sometimes things that aren't spoken of, they actually speak louder than the things that are spoken of. Oh, sorry, I haven't been following the chat, so I'll just have a look, see if there's any questions. Okay, you guys are on top of it. So yeah, so some of the things that sometimes things that aren't spoken of, they speak louder than things that are spoken of. And it was interesting in the debate that the word terrorism didn't actually come up once in the whole debate, and they barely even touched on the issue of national security or foreign policy. Mostly what they talked about was, of course, the virus and racial justice, which are good things. And but it's just comparing it to the presidential debates of 2016. The primary topics were really quite different. And a Pew Research study did surveys, and the second greatest issue on people's minds back in 2016 was Islamic terrorism. But in 2020, it didn't even make the list. So, what changed? Well, President Trump tried to make an enemy out of China because, you have to make an enemy to divert some of the attention to a, quote unquote bad person. But largely, Islam was kind of gone off the radar. But what we know as students of Bible prophecy is that they haven't gone off the radar. They're still very real, and there are a lot of things happening in the world today that aren't necessarily to do with American politics. Islam is still very much a force, and we will see them come up more in Bible prophecy, but certainly it didn't register in the last election. So what we want to do is we want to go back and have a look at the history of Islam, and we're going to begin with Genesis 16. And we'll have a look at the historical beginnings of the Muslim people. So this is quite a long time before Muhammad was born, but there is an origin. And in Genesis 16, it's the story of Hagar. And Sarai couldn't bear a child, and so she suggested that Abram sleep with her handmaid, a slave, whose name was Hagar. And Hagar became pregnant with Abram's child. And at one point, Hagar was giving Sarai some lip. And so Sarai asked that she could send Hagar away. And so we'll look at some of the passages here. If someone like to volunteer to read these two verses.
I will, Jonathan. Genesis 16, 7 and 8. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai.
Thank you. So the first thing that we want to kind of note here is the fact that the angel of the Lord appears to a slave woman. And we understand that the angel of the Lord is no less of a person than Jesus Christ. And so he takes the time to come and talk to Hagar, who's basically just a frightened slave woman at this time. And so would someone else like to read the next few verses?
And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction.
Thank you. So again, the angel of the Lord speaks, and God took the time to speak to Hagar, and this is the very first time in a Bible narrative that an unborn child is named. So Ishmael is not born yet, and not only has he been named, but he's also given one of the Abrahamic promises here. And that promise was that his seed would be as the stars, and that they would be without number, or basically that they could not be counted. And as the seed of Abraham, Ishmael could receive the literal blessings, but he did not inherit the spiritual blessings. And that's something to keep in mind as we look at Ishmael and his progeny. They did receive literal blessings, and they go on to develop a religion very much based on the literal. The next verse, I'll just read that. It says, and he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So we understand this wild man to be the wild Arabian ass, which means that basically he or they are untamable. And we're told in Genesis chapter 25, verse 6, that he is sent away to the east, or to the east country. And so this begins the tribes of the Arabian Peninsula. And basically the hand against every man means that he is contentious, but he dwells in the presence of his brethren. And so who are his brethren? Well, we know that you can include Isaac with them, and these are the brothers of his people, or at least the half brothers. And they dwell in the presence of the descendants of Isaac. So as brothers, as with another person, it's super important that we do not bear false witness against our brothers. We have to be very careful that we don't stereotype every descendant of Ishmael based off of what some people have done. It's the same way that we would want to be treated. So it's very easy to do, and it's easy for the brain to do that, but we have to take the time to think logically, and to think as God thinks, and to look at people the same way that God looks at people. And when we say a large group, we're talking about a quarter of the world's population. So this is not something that gets ignored by God. I mean, 1.6 billion people in the world fall into the Muslim category. So that's so Ishmael is recognized by Muslims as the ancestor of several Northern Arabian tribes. So what we want to do is we want to go forward about 2,500 years from this point, and get an understanding of the Arabian Peninsula, and how in the Arabian Peninsula, basically, the people were parts of tribes, nomadic tribes. And so they're completely tribal people. They fight amongst themselves, and they look after their own tribe, and your protection is your own tribe. It's kind of like an extended family. And your tribe will look after you, because you'll probably have to be fighting for them someday, or every day. And so the tribe will also provide for you. So again, it's like a family. They give you protection. There's a lot of care that is happening within these tribes, and they're quite contentious against the other tribes. So there's no lord, there's no real or formal government within these tribes, and that's kind of an overreaching of all these Arabian tribes. And so this whole region is a tribal world, and it works on revenge and vendettas. And so if somebody does something wrong, you pay them back, and it just goes back and forth like that. And religiously, these people were polytheistic, and they were all basically idol worshippers. And their center of idolatry was in Mecca. And in Mecca, there was a big shrine, and in the pictures today, you'll see the big cube that is called the Hajj, and which Muslims believe that Abraham and Ishmael built, and surrounding the Hajj were about 360 different idols. And one of the idols there was Jesus, and one of them was Mary, and just about everything else that you can imagine. So if you think about Mecca, it was basically the equivalent of the Pantheon. It was the Islamic equivalent of the Pantheon. And so, so every god that you could think of was there. And at the time, Mecca was a big hub of trade. And they had people from all over the world and a god for everyone who showed up. So pretty much no matter where you came from in the world, it was definitely a city center for just about anyone of kind of diversity and accepting, I guess. And so the Arabian tribes believed in the God of the Christians and the God of the Jews, and they believed that he was the greatest God, and they didn't have an idol for this God in Mecca. They made idols for just about every other god, but they didn't make any idols or images for the one true God, accepting the fact that they had Jesus, but Jesus was a physical man. So however they had, they themselves, the people in these tribes, they had many gods themselves, so they were polytheistic. And okay, so we're going to start to look at Muhammad. In 570 AD, Muhammad is born, and Muhammad's father died a couple of months after he was born, and he was wet nursed out to one of the Bedouin tribes, which was just something that they did back then. It was seen to be healthier and safer for a child to be brought up in for the first couple of years outside of the cities. The cities were really kind of unclean and unhealthy at this time, and they were full of disease. So the Bedouin tribes, this was kind of one of their duties, and this was a practice of the time. So so it was an option to have your child to be sent out for the first couple of years of their life to be wet nursed in these Bedouin tribes, and usually the child would be returned about 2 years later. However, Muhammad was a little bit different. He stayed with the Bedouin tribes until he was about the age of 5. And when he's returned to his mother, she hadn't remarried, and that was actually quite unusual at this time. It was both unusual for a child to be wet nursed for 5 years, and it's also unusual for a widow to not remarry. Usually within the tribes, that's how they look after one another, to basically just have someone else marry the widow. And oftentimes the widow would remarry a brother, or a brother of her husband, or someone else that was related. And if there was no one else, then they would often try to marry them to even just anyone in general. So this didn't happen in Muhammad's his mother's case. So Muhammad is returned after his years out, and his mother dies in 577 AD, AD. And at this time, his grandfather takes him, and his grandfather doesn't live for very long until he dies, and then his uncle takes him. So Muhammad belonged to a tribe called the, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, Quraysh tribe, Quraysh, and it was one of the more powerful and healthier tribes, wealthy tribes in this time. And even though Muhammad was from kind of a humble background, he didn't have a whole lot of money growing up, he was still part of this tribe, and he had a fair bit of protection, especially from his uncle, who was, I think, a relatively important trader. And his uncle started having him work on the camel caravans and taught him how to trade. So Muhammad worked himself up slowly and got himself a really good reputation as a trader. And he had some nicknames in Arabic. For example, one of them was, people called him the Trusted One or the Truthful One. And he was just a very pious person. In 595 AD, he's 24 years old, and he's employed by a wealthy widow, a widow merchant whose name is Khadijah. And she employs Muhammad to take a caravan to Syria. And when he returns, he's done really well at this job, and he returned with a significant profit. And so Khadijah has taken quite a liking to him. And so she asks him to marry her. And even though she's 15 years older than him, Muhammad agrees. And so she proposes to Muhammad, and they're married for 24 years in a happy and monogamous relationship. So this is something that, one of those things that people are not aware of, that the case for Muhammad's relationships, and the fact that he was in a monogamous relationship for 24 years. And we'll learn more about the nature surrounding his future relationships. But and they were quite happy together. Is everything all right with the mic there? I think I just got muted.
You were muted, Jonathan, I think, or else cut out. We didn't hear the last part.
Yeah, it came up and said that I was muted by the host, so I don't know what happened. How long ago did that happen?
No, it was just momentary.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah, so basically just saying that he was in this monogamous relationship with Khadijah, and they were quite happy together. So Mecca is getting rich, and the values there are decreasing, just like any place. And even the values that they had within their tribes were decreasing because of the wealth of Mecca. And so everybody was focused on this making money thing. And in 610, 610, Muhammad is 40 years old. And from 595 to 610, Muhammad had 4 daughters with his wife Khadijah. And he also had 1 son who died at birth. But Muhammad had a very good relationship with his daughters, the youngest of which was Fatima. In 610, he goes up into the mountains for his yearly pilgrimage to pray and fast, which he did regularly. And so when we think of the Hajj or of Ramadan, these were cultural practices before the introduction of Islam. So these things actually existed prior to Islam becoming an established religion. And Islam had only reformed a lot of these cultural practices. So they adopted them and reformed them. So when Muhammad was up in the mountains, the story goes that the angel Gabriel appears to him, and the angel says to him, recite. And so Muhammad is terrified, and he asks, recite what? And the angel repeats what he had said before. He says, recite, recite. And he said, well, I don't know what to recite. And then the angel gives to him the very first words of the Quran. And in fact, the meaning of Quran, it means recitation or recitation, however you say that. And Muhammad is frightened, so he's told to recite these words, and he goes back home to his wife, and he puts his head on her lap, and he says, cover me with your shawl, which she does. Then he tells her what happened, and she says, well, I think you might be a prophet for these people. So Muhammad struggles to come to terms with this, and then he goes to Khadijah's Christian cousin, and again is confirmed that these were revelations from God, and that he was indeed a prophet. So that's as the story goes. And so Muhammad struggles with this for the next couple of years because they're telling him that he was a prophet, but there were no more revelations. And so Muhammad decides to keep his revelation to his close family and friends. And then after a couple of years, Muhammad feels as though God had abandoned him. And he fully understands what abandonment is, because he had lost his mother, he lost his grandfather, all these people that were really close to him. And so, and much like Ishmael could as well, his hereditary, the father of, I guess, Muhammad down the line, however you want to say it. So this is kind of a deep-rooted thing for them, this sense of abandonment. And even amongst the Arabic tribes, they were told by Jews and Christians that they were a lost people and that they don't have a prophet and they don't have scriptures. So once again, as the story goes, Gabriel reappears to him and reassures him that he hasn't been forgotten. And then the revelations continued. So from this period onward, he goes on to have many revelations, and it takes Muhammad about 3 years before he starts to go public with these revelations. And yeah, so we have to remember that he was told to recite, but he still is waiting, and all this time is going by. So in the Arabian world, they don't have any art. They don't draw, and they don't have paintings, and they don't have any, not that they don't have architecture, but they don't have any designed architecture. Everything is more, how do you say it, functional and not for looks kind of thing. So, but their art is in their poetry and in their writing. And so even before there was Islam, they were known for their poetry. And so the Quran is lost to us in the English language, because in the Arabic it is seen as a very beautiful prose, but it's something that we can't really appreciate in our language. It would be much like trying to take Shakespeare and putting it into French. Like, so much would be lost in the translation. Or if we were to basically take the King James Bible and to try to translate it to other languages, we know that even within this movement, we know that certain things are lost or interpreted. They kind of come out differently. And so, so trying to understand the Quran in English, you basically lose a lot, and you lose the beauty that is actually in it. So how Muhammad spread this message was to go around reciting. So basically he was going to be an evangelist, and he would recite the verses of the Quran, and they were given to him by the angel Gabriel. And so this is his method of evangelizing. In 613 he starts to go public, and in 614 he begins to be persecuted for the message. And because what this message that he's sharing, the message that he's sharing to the people, he's preaching that there is only one true God, and he's preaching this in Mecca. So there's many gods in Mecca, and because they're polytheistic, what Muhammad is doing is striking at the very heart of their economy and at the heart of their nationalism, threatening their entire livelihood and all that they're basically about. So he begins to receive a persecution, and he also starts to get a following at the same time. So it starts out small, but consistently continues to grow. And as they grow, they begin to be increasingly persecuted as well. And some of them are beaten, and some are even crucified. So crucifixion wasn't something that just the Romans did. Even Muhammad was beaten, and he was jailed. And about a year later, a lot of them fled to Ethiopia. So this is harsh persecution coming from the Meccans at this time. In the year 619 is referred to as the year of sorrows, because that's the year that his wife Khadijah dies. And not only does Khadijah die, but his uncle also dies. And now he's in trouble because his uncle was his protector within this tribe. And now that his uncle is no longer alive, it gave him, who gave him a certain amount of protection. Khadijah also was a wealthy woman, and she could still work and provide for him while he was evangelizing. And so it's said that when he first started to begin evangelizing, that people would actually stop working for him, and others stopped giving Muhammad business. And so his whole livelihood was lost, but at least he still had his wife and his uncle to look after him. So in this year, when they both die, this is why it was referred to as the year of sorrows. So Muhammad's message is one, not just of ridding the city of idols, but it's also one of social justice, which is why he attracted a lot of attention. He attracted a lot of the poor and the underclasses, and a lot of the people that were not part of the Quraysh tribe. So it didn't make him popular, as he was arguing against greed, corruption, and the basic running of the city. But he was encouraging them to take care of the underprivileged, the orphans and the widows, and the things that they used to do when they were tribes, and that they had actually stopped doing. In 620, So this is the time that he reportedly receives a famous vision where he's taken up to heaven, and he gets to meet all the other prophets, and he has a liaison with Moses. And in 622, about 600 kilometers northwest of Mecca is a town called Yathrib, which today we'd know it as Medina. And Yathrib is basically an oasis, but the tribes around there are really in turmoil, fighting against each other. And there was a time that a lot of bad things were going on in Yathrib. And so some of the people there were having a pilgrimage to Mecca. And during that pilgrimage, they came across Muhammad. And so Muhammad is sharing this message, and they're entranced by his message, and they ask him to return with them to Yathrib to help them sort out some of the problems that they had going on there. And so they offer him protection, and so he accepts. And so Muhammad decides that he'll flee Mecca, which was not an easy thing for him to do because the Meccans, they don't trust him. And so he decides to send his friends and his family and his followers out in the middle of the night, and he stays behind. And when they are safe, he says that he would then go. So Muhammad then flees to Yathrib, and this is called the night flight to Medina. And once he's there, Muhammad begins to preach or recite his message of social justice, and they make him governor. And now he's not only a religious leader, but he's also a statesman and a civil leader in this town. He sorts out all their problems, and not only do the tribes convert to Islam, but a number of the people in the surrounding tribes around Arabia, they're also converted. So this becomes a problem for those in Mecca, and because they believe that Muhammad is just amassing a great army, and that he's going to come and wipe them out, so they see him as a trouble, and they feel that they need to get rid of him. In 623 and 624, there was a battle where Mecca keeps coming at Medina and trying to fight against them. And so they called them battles, but they're really just like skirmishes. And all the time that Muhammad was in Mecca, the revelations that were coming to him were saying, take your persecution, do not fight back, do not retaliate. And so when he becomes the ruler in Medina, the revelations change, and now he's told, yes, you can fight, but there are conditions. So violence wasn't mandated, but it was allowed under certain conditions, which is, I mean, very much the same within Christianity when you go through the Bible. The messages change, and the clerics and the Muslim academics and theologians realize that in order to understand the Quran, you have to take it in its historical context. And so they look at his early recitations and they understand them in the context, but the difference between when he was in Mecca to when he was in Medina. So the context is very important to Islamic theologians. And in Medina, he's looking after these people, and he has huge responsibilities. So now violence is permitted. And at this time, you still need to go to Mecca for pilgrimage. So what they do in 628 is he and about 1,400 of the tribesmen, they start marching on Mecca, and they want to go to pilgrimage. The Meccans come out, they meet him, and they say, hey, let's make a treaty. Don't come on pilgrimage this year, but if you come back next year, we'll let you do it then. And so they agreed to this treaty, and the treaty was called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and it was a 10-year treaty, and they went back the next year. And the next year in 629, the Meccans come out, and again, they say, not this year, how about next year? And so they break the treaty. And so Muhammad and his followers, they go back, they discuss it, and then they vow to return to Mecca. And in 630, Muhammad and 10,000, they all march on Mecca, and the Meccans come out and surrender, and they conquer Mecca without even dropping a single drop of blood. So then Muhammad goes into Mecca, cleans up all the idols, he reorganizes the city, and those that were his bitterest enemies in positions of authority and administrative positions, he replaces them. He sets everything in order and everyone converts to Islam. Then he returns to Medina, where he dies 2 years later in 632. But then what we see is that Muhammad did what he does best, and that was that he negotiated. He was, if you remember his beginning, he was a trader, and he was now also a politician. So nobody wanted war, nobody wanted to fight. Under the old tribal laws, he had every right to go into Mecca and to kill them all, and that was what they were expecting, but he did the very opposite. So this is, as we're going through this, I mean, we have to consider, is this the Muhammad that we always believed that we knew, or is this the Islam that we, the context that we understand when we maybe have made prejudgments on people of Islam. So when the Meccans surrendered and they were about to march into Mecca, one of his followers says, what if they attack us? Not everyone is welcoming us in Mecca. And so Muhammad says, you may kill the unbelievers. And this is one of the most taken out of context phrases that are in the Quran that's used against them. And so it gets quoted often, and it's usually never read in its proper context. And so we need to understand what an unbeliever was. In its context, an unbeliever was a polytheistic Meccan. An unbeliever was not a Jew, and it was not a Christian. In Medina, there were Jews and there were Christians, and there were no forced conversions there. You were allowed to be, you're allowed to be whatever religion that you wanted to be. However, if you lived in Medina, you had to pay a tax if you weren't Muslim, but you were still allowed to keep your own religion. So Muhammad was a pluralist, because what they believed was that the Jews and the Christians were, they were referred to as the people of the book. And they believed that the Quran was just an extension of the Old Testament, and that the New Testament, the Quran was just an extension of the Old and the New Testament, and that these were just further revelations. So Muhammad is essentially their Ellen White. I mean, when you think about it. But I'm not saying that he was actually inspired. I'm just saying it's a similar comparison. So this whole thing, is their understanding of what they believe. And the best way to understand any people is not to project your own understanding onto them, but rather to listen to them and learn how they actually see it themselves. I mean, this is the same treatment that we would want to have for ourselves. I think of, living in the age of Facebook and social media, and, a lot of the things that we even, a lot of us even post. And I think, I know that when I'm reading a Facebook post from someone in the movement, like I get what they're usually saying. But one thing that we don't really realize is that, a lot of the people who read our, and this is why you just have to be careful about some of the things that you post. They don't understand the full context or the whole story or the whole walk that we have gone through. And so they don't really understand our history. And we had to go through all that history for a lot of these things to make sense. So sometimes people, I know I've been guilty of it in the past, you post things that you might not realize that the people that are reading it, they're not getting the full understanding that we were privileged to have as we walk through these things over a long period of time. But, at the same time, I know that people have certainly judged this movement based off of complete misunderstanding and not really doing their due diligence to not bear false witness and to look into what it is that we do actually believe, which would not really be an easy thing. It's not something you do in 5 minutes. Okay. So to the Muslims, to the Muslim people or the followers of Muhammad, the Jews and the Christians were just basically an extension of the people of the book. So we were not considered unbelievers. And that title was reserved in its context for these polytheistic Meccans. And when Muhammad said you can kill unbelievers, he also said only if they attack you first, and only if they stop you from reaching the shrine, and only if the truce that we now have falls through, and only if no other truce is in place or can be negotiated, then you may kill the unbeliever. So basically what was said was, yes, you can, but it's better if you don't. And that is the subtext of that mandate. But that is not how this phrase, to kill the unbelievers, has been used, particularly by Christians, to assassinate the character or the belief of the Muslim people. And so, does anyone have any questions? I mean, it's a lot of talking. Oops. Okay, it's not. Okay, so when Muhammad reaches into Mecca, sorry, check that. No questions. Oops, now I'm skipping ahead. Okay. All right, so when Muhammad reaches into Mecca, he doesn't take the throne. And what he does is he sets it in order and he returns Medina. He has a master negotiator, or he was a master negotiator. And in 22 years, he pretty much conquered the entire Arabian Peninsula. And nearly everyone was now Muslim. And the meaning of the word Islam it means to submit or to surrender. And a Muslim person is someone who submits or surrenders to the one true God from their perspective. So the main force of their message is that there is only one God and that you must surrender to that one God. And so we understand that every religion has a perception of what is wrong with the world and provides what they think is the answer or the solution to what is wrong with the world. And what Muhammad perceived was wrong with the world is that people weren't surrendered to God. People were self-sufficient, and this is what happened in Mecca. So long as you had your job and your money, you didn't need God. And God was just in the periphery. And this is very much the same thing in the West. So he wanted God to be number one in your life. And so when God isn't number one in your life, you replace it with an idol. And this is why they are against idol worship. So no idols, because you are to be submitted to the one true God. And whether that idol is your wealth or a graven image or anything, the whole purpose of Islam was to take you back to the worship of God as the top priority in your life. And so Muhammad had several wives later on in his life. So he was married to Khadijah for 24 years and he had his children to Khadijah. But when she passed away, he then married Aisha. And Aisha was the daughter of Abu Bakr. Now we'll remember Bakr was one of his companions, and we remember him from Revelation 9. He was the one who made the decree about not touching those who have the seal of God. And so Muhammad married Bakr's daughter, who was very young. And he also married other wives, 11 in total. And the other 9 wives were widows, and he had children. He had no children to them. And this is what you did. You would take in widows, bring them into your household, and that was the way that they were provided for. So it wasn't like we kind of, when you don't view things in the proper context, we try to take application from the time that you're living in, and we don't really understand the circumstances in this time, that this was the way in which people took care of each other. So it wasn't like like David Koresh in Waco, Texas, or like those polygamous groups that were in Utah, or like it's not the same thing. It was basically just part of their tribal heritage and a way in which they kept, they gave protection and care for each other. So yeah, so this is what you did. All right, so Muhammad, he united all the Arabian tribes within 22 years. And this is a family tree of Muhammad. And you can see that Khadijah is his first wife, and that his wife Aisha is his second wife. And she is the daughter of Abu Bakr. And the point of this graph is basically just to show that his youngest daughter, Fatima, here we see married his cousin Ali, and Ali was the son of his uncle that took Muhammad on and trained him. So Talib, is this right? Abu Talib was his uncle, the one that was referred to earlier on. And so Ali was the son of his uncle that took Muhammad on and trained him and helped him and protected him. Yeah. And so the graph of the children of Fatima and Ali, Hassan and Hussein, becomes very important in Islamic history. Next slide we're going to look at some of the pillars or the core beliefs of Islam, and there's 5 of them that we're going to look at. So the first pillar of Islam is your profession of faith, known as the Shahada. And basically the Shahada was, your profession of faith was that you had a belief that there was no other God and that Muhammad is the true messenger of God. And so this is a central aspect of the Islamic faith. And if you were converted to Islam, you would go into a mosque with your friends and recite the Shahada 3 times in front of witnesses, and you would then be considered a convert. Pretty simple. Number 2 was is their prayer. So their prayer is called the Salat. So this is very similar to what, Christians kind of believe. The prayer or the Salat was praying to God 5 times a day, and it's because they want you to prioritize God in your life and surrender to him, so you actually stop to put God first at those particular times of day. I actually had a really cool opportunity. A couple of years ago, I was working with a friend just for a week with his company, and he had a couple of guys that were Muslim, and it was during Ramadan. And anyways, I had the opportunity to, while working with them, this guy, we had a lot of conversations because I was trying to explain my religion to him and he was explaining his religion to me. And it was actually a really good conversation. We knew we didn't agree or we didn't believe in the same things, but we totally appreciated each other's religion. And so during Ramadan, we're working and he would stop literally 5 times a day, like to do these prayers, but the prayer has a lot to it. Like they, and he invited me to come and watch. He said, do you want to come and watch? And I said, yeah. So like the company that short for some guys, and I was just off work at the time, was a window washing company. And so we would be washing windows on people's houses, and he would go to like the tap on their outside tap. And what they do is like, they'll wash their arms all the way up to their forearms. They take their shoes and their socks off and they wash their feet. And then they do like a repetitive kind of prayer. And they do that over and over again. And the whole time they're fasting, like he wasn't eating for, I think it was the month. I think they eat at nighttime though. It's kind of strange that they would fast all day and then eat, like, I think like gorge on food before you go to bed. And then I think that's how he explained it to me. But it was really interesting. And it was kind of neat to be able to be invited to see this, because it's something that we don't know about and we don't really understand, and we may have different beliefs, but it was actually kind of an interesting thing. The third one was alms, and this is basically they're giving charity, and it says Muslims pay 2.5% of their total wealth to charity to the poor. So this is not of your total income, it is of your total wealth. So you add up everything that you own, and this goes directly to the poor. It doesn't go to an imam or a mosque. It doesn't pay for carpet on a church floor. You can hand it straight to the poor or give it to any charity of any religion. And I think that's pretty amazing. It protects from probably a lot of chances of having corruption. And yeah, so that's the third one. And then fasting, of course, Psalm during Ramadan, putting God first, prioritizing is the purpose of this. And then the last one is their pilgrimage, which is to the Hajj, which is in Mecca. And so everyone's expected to go there at least once in their lifetime if they're physically able or financially able. And what does it say? Financially able to do it. If you cannot provide for your family while you go, there are conditions. Yeah, so it's not something that's mandated that's going to cause you to do, to struggle in your life or to cause other people to struggle. So it's just something to do if you can do it. All right. Again, any questions anyone has? Is anyone getting kind of the drift here that, or has anyone learned anything that they maybe didn't know about Islam?
Do you know when the Shahada began?
Like when they, what do you mean? Like when did they start doing this?
Yeah.
No.
Like I guess I'm just wondering if Muhammad was alive or if this happened after.
Oh, this is like something they added after?
That was-
Well, I think isn't it part of the Quran? I know that you have the Quran and then you have, they have, what's the other book called? It's like an interpretation book. I forget what it's called. But it interprets their law, and I think there's a couple different versions, and it's part of
The Hadith?
The Sharia.
yeah, was it the Hadith?
Hadith.
Hadith, yeah, that's what it is. So do you know what that is, Tabo? Is it like how that works?
I'm trying to recall because I did a course on this once upon a time. Of course, there's the Quran and then the Hadith. I think you're right in terms of identifying it as a body of interpretive text, in terms of, elaborating on the Quran. And it's kind of like with the, sorry, I'm reading to you. It says the Hadith refers to what the majority of Muslims believe to be a record of the words, actions, and the silent approval of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Yes, okay, that's how they did it. The Quran is the words of, the dictated words of God, okay? Then the Hadith is the record of Muhammad's life and conduct.
Oh, okay.
Viewing him as the perfect Muslim, viewing him as the one who understood the Quran and what it looked like in practical application best. So you look to his life and how he handled situations and how he judged in cases to determine, what the best way to approach situations and legal cases is, and issues is, so the Hadith is, the words and the actions of the Prophet.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So Muhammad was like their template, basically, or the almost funny to say, like the prototypical Muslim, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Jonathan, you're muted again. We can't hear you.
So that the next part into right? Oh, is my mic? Can anyone confirm
Yes, we can hear
the
you.
mic is working?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So this slide here, well, how much time do I have? 15 minutes. Okay, so this slide here, we're going to look at small differences, but some of the differences between the foundations of Sunni and Shia Islam. So when Muhammad was on his deathbed, his family were off organizing his funeral in preparation for his passing. And while the family, who was going to replace him as the political leader, and not as a religious leader. And so the first replacement was Abu Bakr, and Bakr replaces him, but he dies within 2 years. And so after 2 years, he's succeeded by Umar, and Umar is assassinated. And then he's replaced by Ali, and Ali is Muhammad's blood cousin. Say Ali there as the third caliph, it says the fourth caliph. Who should have replaced Muhammad. So I guess like a schism in their religion. Is they disagreed over who is going to replace Muhammad. And the Sunnis said that it should have been his companions, who were the, where is it? The Sunni said that should be Rashidun Caliphate is right here on the side. And it established after the death, it was established after the death of Muhammad, and it was ruled by the first 5 successive caliphs, who caliph basically means successor. And so after his death in 632, and Shia Islam sees the first 3 as usurpers. So the Shia see these 3 as usurpers and were not legitimate successors. According to them, the first successor should have been Ali. And so this is where the split between the Sunni and Shia comes from. And there was some war in that time, and this was known as the first fitna. It went from 656 to 661, and it was basically a civil war. And a fitna is a time of distress or sorrow, so nobody was happy to be warring over this. Eventually the whole thing was settled, and then the Sunni and Shia more or less lived together peacefully for hundreds of years, until all the way up until, it doesn't show it on here, but 1979, where we see the allies, 2 countries that were allies, Iran and Saudi Arabia, they become rivals. And when we see the split between the Sunni and the Shia again, this is when that basically happened, about 40 years ago. So for many hundred years, they all lived together quite happily. So there's not this long history of violence and hatred and a split. And it's actually interesting. I don't know, like if you ever see old photos like from pre-1979 in Iran, like these people were quite progressive. They were really quite progressive, and same in a lot of the Muslim countries. I think Afghanistan as well. Before you had these hardline religious leaders come in, these were places where the women wore pants. You know, like it was. They had jobs. They were allowed to, as far as I know, they were allowed to drive, and they had, you know, I don't know how equal their society was, but it was certainly much more progressive than you see today in a lot of these countries. And kind of gives you a stark realization of what 2 opportunities we have in the West, and maybe our old perspective was more of a theocracy, you know, something that we wanted. We thought that it would have been right. And when you see just the existence of people under a country that is a theocracy as opposed to a country that has equality, it's quite a difference. I mean, I think just quality of life is quite different. So the final date we're going to be placing on Muhammad's line is, in this study, is 637. And this is when they take Jerusalem. So after the life of Muhammad, the Islamic religion spreads, and it's only a few short years before they have not only the whole peninsula, but the Levant and the rest of the Middle East, and they took Jerusalem in 637 AD. So remember that in Jerusalem, there are Jews and Christians and Muslims, and they all believe together quite peacefully. They all live there together quite peacefully. And, you know, it wasn't like Shangri-La or paradise or anything like that, but everyone's getting along. And you could live in Jerusalem. You could go to pilgrimage to Jerusalem if you're a Christian, as long as you paid the jizya, which was the tax required for those who didn't follow the Islamic faith. But you have to keep in mind that Islam is not a pacifist religion, and but it does not condone violence, even though it does allow for violence. But we just saw the context of that. So Muhammad himself was not considered a violent man. In fact, he was actually quite a progressive when it came to women. He mandated that women should be educated. His second wife, Aisha, was very highly trained and took leadership positions, not only in religious matters, but also in state matters. And he also brought in laws that stopped infanticide for girls, because they were still killing female infants because they wanted a boy. And so he also made it legal for women to receive an inheritance, which meant that they could own property and they could own their own businesses. The Quran had verses in it that were certainly not pro-equality for women, in much the same way that if you go to either the Old or the New Testament. So they're still hemmed in by their 7th century patriarchal ideas. They're hemmed into the same mindset and idea that existed back then. It wasn't exclusive of their religion. It was exclusive of the entire world. I mean, it was not exclusive, I guess would be the smarter way of saying that. That was the context in which things just were for all those years. So the idea of the hijab and the burqa came in much later, and they were influenced from Persian culture that imposed itself on the Islam religion. And these customs were not considered Islamic in the time of Muhammad, and you won't find it anywhere in the Quran. So as far as time is concerned here, before we get into something else, maybe I'll just stop there for time, because we'd be starting off in a new aspect of the study, and it's probably not enough time to get into it. So does anyone have any comments or anything? I know it was kind of a long non-interactive study, but
very interesting, Jonathan, though. And I know several points as you were presenting and so on, I couldn't help but reflect how the similarities with Bible, you know, we wouldn't necessarily call it total truth for sure, but at the same time, Ishmael was a son of Abraham's, and the 12 sons that Ishmael had, and so on, God was blessing. And, you know, his promise to Hagar in the desert, God very definitely did fulfill. So it just very interesting. I mean, I did learn some things for sure. So I appreciate very much the perspective and the topic. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, there definitely are a lot of similarities. I know that were popping up in my mind as we were kind of going through this, how just how things were, the context of things in times that are not today, like things were just a certain way in the world. And we know that within our religion that God had to work with what he had in those times. And their perspective it's kind of coming from the same way. Like I always find it so confusing that such a complex religion could be built, and like referring to Islam, and not, I'm not saying there's any truth in it. I'm just saying it just seems so strange that it really runs kind of along a lot of the same lines. And I just wonder how that could be. I just find it very interesting.
I was just wondering, are there many differences between the Sunni and the Shia?
Today, or, I mean, their only difference that originally the split happened because of who they believed the successor was. And like it said, there was no issues until 1979 between, essentially between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And we know Iran is a Shia country, and I think that's right. And then Saudi Arabia is a Sunni country. So whatever differences they would have today would only have probably existed the last 40 years.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we'll just end with a prayer, and hopefully my internet won't cut out again.
I just want to say before you close that I find it interesting how, there appears to be, there's a double standard in terms of, how Islam is handled versus how we as Christians, or, Protestant Christianity wishes to be handled and viewed itself. Like you find evangelical critics of Islam point to the religion's violent history. They point to violent injunctions in the Quran, but at the same time, if you read the Bible, you see similarly, really violent history, where God told them, wipe out everyone and don't leave one, don't even leave the cattle, and, you see, similarly, violent injunctions or violent actions carried out by God's people in the same way, So I feel that in a sense, there's that double standard. And I've listened to Muslim scholars, some of them, and some of the more mainstream, modern, or progressive, whatever you want to call it, they'll say, no, you can't just read the Quran at face value. You have to understand how to interpret it, right?
Yeah.
And we say the same thing, that you can't just read the Bible at face value. You have to know how to interpret it. People make a big issue that, they call Muhammad, they call Muhammad a pedophile.
Yeah.
That he married a really young girl. But you have examples of that in the Bible as well, where, really young women were taken on as wives,
Mm-hmm.
So there's that double standard, that I think is there, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, and most who hold to that double standard, they don't see it. They don't see it when it applies to them. That we have the same thing, really, if we're gonna look at it. But we view ourselves differently, regardless, right? So.
Well, I think the most interesting part about that is not only are they held under a wrong light, but the ones that are holding them under a wrong light are the ones that are actually living out the exact same life. You know what I mean? Like they have the same skeletons in their closet. And it's not like, like if you look at today's world and the people that will defend Muslims in America are the progressive, non-religious people, right? And they're the ones that are defending them, and the ones that are attacking them and wanting them out of the country because of their violent history are the ones that have a violent history themselves for the same reasons, and probably a more truthful violent history. Like the next part of the study that was about to start, it's going into the Crusades, and the Crusades are insane. Like it's the same thing as like the Protestants coming out of Catholicism, and they were doing the exact same thing. They were killing people who didn't believe the way that they believed. They were doing the exact same thing, burning people, like Servetus, right? How Calvin killed Servetus. These were the Protestant people that we held up as, heroes. And so there's just so much hypocrisy involved in our own history as Christians. And the ones who, if anyone really, I don't want to say anyone has a right to be against people of religion, but if anyone, it would be the ones that don't believe in anything. That they're not following along with any religion because they all have a violent past. And this would be like the secular or atheist kind of people today, but they're the ones that actually defend, people of Islam. And Christians get offended by that because they think like, oh, they're just going to bring them all in, and then they're going to, they're going to explode and take us all over or whatever, like I don't know. I find it is really interesting, the hypocrisy and the double standard that is there. And I'm glad that I can now see it, because I know I certainly saw things a certain way, even just a few years ago, based off of all the conspiracy, like the fear, the ignorance. It was all ignorance. It was a lack of any understanding of who these people really are, what their background is, and at the same time, as a Christian, demanding that people respect my background and learn about what we believe in, just total hypocrisy. All right, well, if there's no more comments, maybe we'll just have prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you so much for this opportunity to learn about the Muslim people, and to learn more about people of a different faith, and not just who or what they are or what they believe today, or the experiences of these people in their recent history, but going back into their past and trying to understand them better, the same way that we would want people to understand us, Lord. I pray that we would do the same thing with all people, and that we would not be a people that would bear false witness, that we would not be a people that would be convicted of your righteousness and of your law only on certain points, but then on other points be complete hypocrites. We thank you, Lord, for bringing us into this light, and on so many wisdom, true wisdom, Lord, and how we treat other people. So, Lord, I pray that these points would settle deeper within each one of us, and we would consider just how we treat all people in our life, Lord, and how we view people within our own our own daily lives, or just in general as Christians. So, Lord, I thank you for giving us this opportunity, and I pray that you'll bless the rest of our evenings and the rest of the week for each one of us, Lord, as we reflect upon these things. We thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.